Hey, everybody. All right, so who's heard about AI today? I'm thinking a couple of us, right? Well, this is just another presentation about how AI is going to change everything. It's going to make it all better, right? Okay, maybe not really, but it's pretty good. So AI has pushed us into this world where basically velocity is everything, right? How quickly can I send this email? How quickly can I push this feature? Maybe I can generate a picture of a cat at the same time too, because that's fun, and then also sell something to my customers as quickly as possible. But we're getting to this place where we have to start asking ourselves, why? Why are we trying to move so quickly? Are we actually being more productive? Are we missing what productivity actually means? And are we actually just pushing more activity? And is that actually better? And that also gets us to this place where we're sort of addicted to speed, and we're comparing our speed with our colleagues' speed and saying, I wrote my code faster, I wrote my email more quickly, I responded to our boss first, so I'm better, right? And I don't think that's the purpose of all of this. I don't think that's why OpenAI made GPT-4, GPT-5, and now even the codex being available for awesome writing code. And I don't think that's what the makers of AI had in mind. They want us to spend our time doing the things that we love the most, that provide the most value, and allow us to be most creative. So that's what I'm here to talk about today. Using AI on purpose or solving problems that actually matter. So I'm Jocelynn Hartwig. I've been in machine learning, data science, AI since before GPT-3 came out. I know I look younger than that, but I promise I'm serious. And so with that, I've gotten to see what the good side of model development looks like and also what the bad side of it looks like. And that was before we entered the space of global, unregulated access to these models to do everything much more quickly without a set of standards that say this is how you should think about it, or this is when it's potentially a bad use case, or this is when you're actually doing more harm than good. And so that's what I'm here to talk about today. And so when I think about using AI, I look at it as 3 different modes that I go into as a person. Now, we all know that AI can switch into like agent mode or assistant mode or helper mode, but I'm talking about our modes as human beings. So when I'm using AI, I'm either learning something, trying to do something that I haven't done before. Maybe I need to, I don't know, if my toilet broke or something and I don't know how to plumb it, I might ask ChatGPT, what do I do? The water's going everywhere. And I would call that my learning mode, right? Because I assume that the model knows how to do something that I don't necessarily know how to do. And then we have our analyzing mode, and that's when I'm trying to make a decision. So maybe I have a massive set of data that I know that I don't have the time to go through, or maybe I just don't want to go through it. And so I might send that to GPT and say, what's the trend here? What should I do with this information? Is this a good thing or is this a bad thing? And then we have augmenting, and that's when it's something that I already know how to do, like writing code, and I just want to use AI to do it faster. Now, in each of these scenarios, AI is so helpful. And at the beginning, I'm kind of joking about that we're in this AI everything world, but I believe in that. I work for Microsoft now as an AI solution engineer, where I get to help really cool customers like NASA do things like get to the moon more quickly and more effectively because AI exists. So I believe in the mission, I believe in the purpose, but I just think it's really important that we're very intentional about how we use these things. And let me show you what I'm talking about here. Okay. So if we start with that first mode that I was discussing, learning, and I think most of us are developers here, but if we could imagine what it was like when we were first learning code, maybe that was 5 years ago for some of us, maybe it was 25 years ago for some of us. Either way, it looks a lot different now, right? When you're approaching a new problem space and you want to learn it, most of us probably turn to AI. And so if we think about maybe a junior developer on our teams looking to do something for the first time with AI, they might have a prompt like this. Create a website about cats, because that's what their PBI said, or that's what their backlog story said, or that's what their mentor told them to do. And this is a reasonable place to start at first glance, right? I have AI now, I can give it the problem that I'm trying to solve, and it will theoretically create a website about cats for me. But let's look at the output here. So first, I'm just going to look at GPT's response, and it's a website. It's just a bunch of HTML. It does have some cat information, and if I don't know code, I could look at this and say, this looks great. I understood the assignment. The mail has been answered. We can move forward from here. And I can even click it and be like, look, team, once this decides to come up, why? Oh. Some of my friends are really smart and record their demos in advance. I'm not sold on that yet, so bear with me. um, let's see. There we go. So GPT encourages the user and says, look, I made you a website. It has to do with cats. You told me via your prompt that this is what you wanted. And it has some basic features. There are definitely some bugs here and there. But if I don't know how to write code and I just was told that this is what I needed to do, I might look at this output and say, this is great. This is what I wanted. I can move on from here. But the really sad thing with that is if I'm a junior developer or if I've never written code before, what did I learn from this situation other than that I can send a prompt to GPT and it will respond to me with an answer and then I can move on with life, I guess, and call myself a developer? And so I want to show approaching this a different way when it comes to learning. If we started this with a different prompt and again are wearing our junior developer shoes and say, I've never written in code before. What do I need to know and consider before building a website? This lets us use one of LLM's biggest core features, which is adding context. Now, everyone's talking about context right now, and there are a lot of really complicated, wonderful ways to provide it, like MCP, for instance. But even when we're just talking about basic prompt engineering, when you're trying to learn something, your first piece of context should be how much you know or don't know about the subject that you're asking about. And so in this case, if I'm a junior that's never written code before, that tells the model, let's start with the basics. Should this person even be building a website? And let's see what it says. And so it starts with, let's make a plan. Why are you building this website? How will we know that it's successful? What should the overall structure of the website be? And how do you want to brand it? Now, some of these questions, I think we could have started even more basic, but I still like the idea of when the user's trying to learn something, responding with something that makes them think about it and say, okay, well, what am I trying to do? Why am I trying to build this website? What's the overall purpose of this? And then if we go down a little bit in its response, you can see here, it starts with the build approach then. So I really like that it started off with no code first. That's the fastest option. And I think for a lot of especially founders of companies that aren't developers or anyone that's looking to build something, they need a website and they know AI might help them. I think that's a beautiful response. Maybe you should use Squarespace or Wix. Why are you even picking up code? You have way more tools in your tool belt. So that user has already learned that they have more options, and GPT didn't put code into the hands of someone who probably doesn't know how to manage it. And then it kind of increases the complexity. So the next thing it's suggesting is a CMS or a content management system. Maybe they need a fancy website that has data that goes both directions. So maybe they should use WordPress or something that allows them to kind of customize one side and start building pages on the other. Totally reasonable option. And then most complicated, it throws out the static and modern way to build a web application and starting to talk about HTML, CSS, SPA frameworks, a headless CMS. And I think that even then, it could have gotten a little bit more descriptive as to what that really means, but it's still kind of leading the learner down this path of there are all these options out here. And so it keeps going for a while. I'm not going to dive into each of these because I think most of us are devs here, so it's not super interesting. But at the end, then, it asks, well, first, here's a plan, which I think that's great. If we think about a boot camp or if you're going on YouTube to learn how to code or anything like that, this tells the user, generally, this is what your journey could look like. You could probably get this done in maybe a month or at least learn how to do it in a month. And I think that's just fantastic expectation setting. And then it tells them what they could do next, as well as asks them, do you want to go the direction of like a Wix website, or do you want to learn how to write code? And so I respond with, I want to learn how to write code. And then it starts to actually dive into teaching the user something. And I know that right now, especially in the media, teachers and educators, and generally folks that are in the position where they have to teach people things that they don't know, they say AI is really, really scary because it's giving students information that they're not going to be able to understand, they're not going to remember it, this is taking away from my ability to teach, and so on. And I think we should challenge that notion and say, if we're teachers, we should be teaching our students how to prompt. When I work with younger developers today, I mean, 5 years ago, I might have said, this is what HTML is, this is what CSS is. Now I'm like, this is how you prompt an LLM to get to the answers that you want. Don't say, how do I build a website? Say, what is HTML? How do I learn it? What's the point of CSS? Where does it fit in the stack? What is that crazy thing called JavaScript, and why does it make the button work? When you start equipping people who are trying to learn with these kind of prompts, then the LLM really can be the teacher, and it gives the information to the student in a way that's digestible, that's understandable, and ultimately retainable. There's so many articles right now about brain drain around LLMs and how, they're taking away our ability to learn. And I just want to call out that it doesn't have to be that way. Those of us that are technologists that have a decent understanding of what's happening behind the scenes here can equip folks that are learning, especially technical concepts, with reasonable prompt engineering that allows them to use these models to learn in a very, very accessible way. So now I'm going to shift to a slightly less technical example, but still in that learning space, if my internet wants to be my friend. Oh, no. OK. Can you cut screen share for a second? Did it cut? Thank you. Sorry about this, friends. OK, you can go ahead and bring it back. OK, so less technical example for how to use an LLM to learn. I'm hoping this is an example that we can all relate to, which is when you change jobs to a new company. I'm a job hopper, and one of the hardest, scariest parts has been, what does performance evaluation look like in my company? And if you're a company that's using Microsoft products like M365, then a lot of companies are saying, write your performance evaluation with the LLMs because they have access to all of our SharePoint or Confluence or whatever data and can help you understand, what needs to be here. But in a similar way to our last example of if we just say, create a website for me, the output is going to just be HTML. If I say, just create my performance evaluation for me, the output is this generic, the AI made it look really, really nice, but it's ultimately not helpful at all because I didn't ask it, how am I evaluated? What are my core priorities? How will my manager ultimately decide how well I did this year? And so with this incredibly basic prompt, just write this evaluation for me, the end result isn't very, very helpful. And I really want to take this back to learning again, because when you're starting at a new company and that company uses a centralized LLM like M365 Copilot, you have a dictionary of how your company works at your fingertips. But if you're prompting it very, very basically and not providing it any context with what you know about your company, what you're trying to get out of this performance evaluation, then the response is going to be generic. And if you copy and paste this into your self-eval, it's probably fine. It would be OK. But you're not going to get nearly as far as you could if, and we're going to have the same problem here. Yep. OK. Can you cut it again? Sorry. Let's see here. OK, you can bring it back. OK, so if we compare this prompt to the first one, so write a performance evaluation for me, versus I'm new to this company and I want to learn what are the core competencies that I'm measured against, which activities have I already done that Copilot knows about since it's connected with everything that I'm measured against, and what is the outcome of performance evaluations at my company. I think a lot of us assume that promotions will happen at the same time, or that this is the path that you need to go on, and so on and so forth. But it's different at every single company. And so kind of regardless of where you are in your career, if your company is using a tool like this, you can use this to learn about how do I get promoted, or what is that going to look like. And the LLM does a pretty good job at mapping that. So at Microsoft, we're measured against core competencies, and you can see here it maps that to how that kind of works. And then it shows which activities that I've done that align to the ways that I'm measured against with the supporting documentation. followed by the actual outcomes of performance evaluations. So I've worked a myriad of places, and what does that, arbitrary scoring actually mean changes heavily depending on where you are. And we can have the actual real data behind that because we have Copilot here. We have something that's telling us exactly how this is supposed to work because I prompted it and asked for that information specifically. So generally here, at this point, I wouldn't say copy this into my eval, and it's even kind of helping me understand that that's not what I should do. It asks the follow-up question of where do we want to go from here? What do we want to do next with this? And again, this is just an example of when you're using a model to learn. My goal here wasn't Copilot, write my performance evaluation. My goal was Copilot, how do I write my performance evaluation? How do you do your really fast LLM thing and give me all of that data, and then empower me as the learner to be able to do something with that information? So next, I'm going to step back into this framework then and talk about analyzing. So we've talked about all of the ways that you can learn against it, which is fantastic. But I think for a lot of us, especially those of us that are further in our career, we're often using LLMs to analyze a large set of data or make a decision or ultimately determine, what we're going to do next. And so fingers crossed that my internet didn't mess up this one too. Okay, great. So my first example here around analysis, I don't know if we have any hiring managers in the room, but it's one that I see pretty often, which is taking a job requisition and then taking a resume and saying, should I hire this person, yes or no? Now, a lot of our companies use systems like an ATS, an applicant tracking system that's kind of doing this as the first step. But even when we're interviewing people, a lot of times it's really easy to just say, hey, this is the job, this is the person, hire or don't hire. So in this example, in this prompt, the top picture there is actually the job rec for my current role. I've been in it for about a year and a half. And then the demo resume is my actual resume. And I just wanted to see how would it do against this decision. Now, I kind of laughed at this and was like, well, LLM, you don't think very much of me. But the first thing it comes back with and says is, do not hire this person. She is not qualified. She will not succeed at this role. And I think we have to think about that relative to what my prompt was. All that I said was I have attached a job description and a candidate's resume. Should I hire this person? No additional context, no, please help me make this decision, just make the decision for me. And so its decision was probably not, don't go with this person. And it justifies it. It says that, there are certain parts of the rec that I didn't have called out in my resume, which is real and fair. I didn't tailor my resume to this job post, which you should do that if you're applying for a job, but I didn't. And so I can't entirely say that it's incorrect. But what I will say is that when we're hiring folks or making human-level decisions, if we're asking something that's not exactly deterministic, what should we do that's actually going to impact a human, and then we take the LLM's answer right out of the box, that creates a lot of risk and potentially harm because this is what happens. And a lot of times, this is what the resume sorting systems look like, just yes, no, based on this arbitrary data. And so if we look at a more complex prompt, same data, same job rec, my resume, and then I specifically say, here's the rec, does this person's resume align with the requirements? What parts of their experience are potentially transferable? And I want to stay on that line for a second because when we're prompting a model for a decision, we shouldn't say hire this person or not hire this person. We should say give me some data that's relevant to how I make my decisions. So when I'm interviewing folks or if I'm thinking about, who should I refer, I want to look at it from the lens of maybe they weren't exactly this role before, but what have they already done that aligns to what they're doing? And can an AI read through their 10-page resume along with this job rec that I didn't write and potentially connect the dots? I think that's a much more useful place for GPT to sit in this kind of hiring chain because it shouldn't make the decision. It should just help me comb through the data. And then my last question here is, tell me about the company that they used to work for. What lessons could they bring forward in the interview? Because the same way that we expect the candidate to, research Microsoft, research the target company, I should be able to grill them about what we do and what we've got going on. I think it's reasonable that as an interviewer, I would use the LLM the same kind of way, learn about their company, learn about what they've done so that, it's a productive conversation and not just a one-way me asking them a bunch of questions. And then with that prompt, we can see that already the output is a lot more positive, and I think that it's crucial to point out here that when you prompt from a place of positivity, the model is going to respond with that same positivity. So my question wasn't, what have they done that looks like this resume? It was, what parts of their experience are potentially transferable? And that's already me kind of asking a leading question, and that's what we should be doing. If we're asking the model a question kind of just blankly, that says that we don't know enough about the situation. If I've never hired someone before and I'm just like, they have this resume, this is my job rec, how does it match? It might do an okay job like what we saw in the first prompt, but that just isn't really me empowering myself and is instead me really relying on that model to do the work for me. And so instead, when I phrase it that way, it comes back with overall alignment because that's what I asked for. And then it goes through matching the job to the requirements. And looks line by line to understand, okay, maybe the experience wasn't exactly, word for word what the resume is asking for, the rec is. So for instance, the first one, technical pre-sales experience or consulting experience. Round one rejected me because I don't have pre-sales experience before this job. I wasn't doing that before. I was a consultant though, and if the LLM is trying to parse those words and understand what they mean, then it's able to come back and say, oh wait, yeah, she did have experience that kind of looked like that. It does seem like it makes sense. Maybe it's not the same exact word that's in the rec, but close enough, we think that she could do it. And so it does that for quite a few lines here, and you're able to kind of see step by step what it thought about each step. And then it still calls out the gap areas. So it's not just like this is a perfect candidate. Here are potential areas of improvement. Here are things that this person hasn't done. And then it specifically goes into the company context because I asked it to. And I think that's the overall pattern here. If it's garbage in, garbage out, just like any other data, if I ask for something, it's going to give it to me. If I don't, then it's going to just make its best guess. And so then at the end of this, it still evaluates the strengths, but then I find it great that the summary recommendation is the polar opposite of the first one, just because I asked the question differently from a more positive perspective in a way that as a human, I actually evaluate candidates for a role. And so when we're using AI to analyze different decisions, different amounts of data, it's really important for us to actually be a data analyst relative to that area. And if we're not, then I think we should question, do I need to go back to step one and start learning more about this? Or can I just trust that model implicitly and say, yes or no, make this decision for me? Okay, and then let's move to augmenting. So we covered learning, we covered analyzing. The last step in this is augmenting. And these are the areas that we can use AI to do something that we already know how to do. So I'm a developer. I use code or AI all the time to help me write code in this augmentative way. And so I want to start out again with a very basic example. I'll zoom in on this. There we go. Oops. Let's go up. Okay. So I have a very basic prompt here at the top. Create a new file that migrates this contact form in HTML to React. Not a lot of information. I'm pretty specific, but it's not a ton of information. And I already know how to do that. I just want AI to do it for me. And I do want to take a look at just the base data that I'm providing here just to give everybody some context. And so this is just a very long contact form. It's vanilla JavaScript, some HTML, some CSS, nothing too fancy. And so AI responds, or Copilot does, and it says what it's going to do, which is somewhat helpful. It's going to migrate it to a React component. It's going to create the CSS file, create an app.js, and then it feels like it did it. However, much like our first example when we said create a website about cats, if we look at the code that this wrote, it's not making use of the reasons that we would want to move to React. It didn't really componentize it. Like, it created a bunch of components in this one JSX file, which is fine, but I'd have to refactor this. I'd have to go through it and say, okay, you basically copy and pasted the styling. You didn't go with React paradigm for how you store state in a lot of areas, and it kind of just threw out a lot of React code, which is an okay place to start. this isn't a running application. It didn't give me the boilerplate for a React website, and it's just not very, very actionable. And so as a developer, I could look at this and say, okay, this is fine. I can refactor it. At least it did something for me. Or once again, I can approach this from a more intentional mindset. And so if we shift to a different version of doing it, let me make this full screen, zoom in. Now, this is just a slight improvement to the prompt. You could take this a lot further, and when you're doing a true migration, I would say it's even more scaled out than this. But just as an example, I call out that I'm still migrating my code from vanilla HTML to React, what my target styling library is, how I want the component library to be set up, and then my last phrase here is the most important, which is to reference the Copilot Markdown file that contains the instructions. Now, this is where prompt engineering and doing prompt engineering in a way that aligns with the tooling that you're using becomes very important. In the keynote, we heard about Spec Kit, and that is a more scaled out version of doing this. But this is just a basic example. I'll make this a little bit bigger here. There we go. Where I have this pretty lengthy, pretty verbose markdown file that explains exactly what I want my design patterns to be, exactly what I want my architecture to be, and how I want AI to ultimately migrate that baseline HTML form. And so if we go through this, and this is a decent amount of work, it takes a decent amount of thinking, but it's worth it because you can call out, again, your core architecture, some examples of what you want that to look like. What's the component structure of this target application? I don't think we want just a flat repo, a bunch of HTML or JSX files. How we want to do state management. If you're familiar with React and SPA world, the decisions that you make around that can make or break your project. Of course, we want to use TypeScript, what we want our custom hooks to look like, how we want our component library to look, what are our overall component design principles. And this is one of the most important things when it comes to really writing any kind of code with AI. AI is going to go with, what is most documented on the internet and what's in its knowledge base and, what it's generally aware of. But it's still on us as architects, as developers, and as thinking people to say, this is what we want our architecture to look like, this is a good design pattern, and this is kind of how we want to make sure that this application scales. And if we don't know the answer to those questions, then just going with what the LLM says back is an unsafe decision because it could say, for instance, if I don't know what polymorphic components are, but Copilot decided it's going to go with that for this overall structure, now not only is the AI writing code that I didn't specifically tell it to write, it's doing it in a way that I don't know how to maintain or why it even made that decision. And so at this stage, when you're architecting something, much like Brady's example from the keynote today, right, it can take a lot of time to think through that first step. And there used to be a business analyst and a product owner and an architect and devs, everybody doing that. Instead, now we can sit down and still get through that design phase more quickly, but we can't skip it. We can't just say or migrate my code. We have to still sit down and think through it. And we kind of do that through the entirety of what it takes to build the application. So I'll keep going here. We've got our styling engine. I like Tailwind, so that's what I told it to do. Responsive design, of course, that's important, and what our responsive design pattern is going to be, as well as what forms are going to look like, and just really any of the things that you would expect to be kind of decided up front when you're doing either a greenfield project or a migration so that you know that your target state is going to scale and is going to be the way that you need it to be. Test scenarios, of course, are always important to call out. And yeah, I mean, it's a pretty lengthy file. This probably took me, with AI helping me kind of think through, I wrote all of the patterns out there, and then it was like helping me populate it. Probably an hour to build something like this, and then validating it with my peers. But this was so worth it, because then when we look at the end result here, first, we just actually have a React application, and I think that's one of the biggest wins in this, because this builds, this runs, you're able to interact with it, so it answered the mail on that. But then it also followed what I said. So we have a component library that matches the design pattern that I called out. We have custom hooks that match the design pattern that I wanted it to do. We have the styling engine that I wanted. It's all TXX, and so on and so forth. And so in these situations, when we're augmenting, doing something that we already know how to do, it's kind of like I could have written all of that code, or I could have started with that baseline and then refactored into this. But that kind of takes away from the point of using AI to move more quickly. That wouldn't have been more quick. I would have been going through a bunch of code and been like, AI, I hate that pattern, or you didn't use Tailwind, or you just copied my vanilla version and now it's in React. That's not very helpful. Versus let's sit down for an hour, maybe with the team, maybe with the BA, maybe with the leader, whomever, and say, what does this need to do? What decisions do I need to make as an architect? And how can I effectively convey those to an LLM in a repeatable way? And then to me, the best part about using Copilot Markdown is that now that this is here, and maybe we're going to use React moving forward, when I onboard new developers, or when I use Copilot, or when I decide to write new features myself, this is still the baseline. This is still the source of truth for the overall design of the application to make sure that we maintain its conceptual integrity over the lifetime of developing this application. These should always be living documents. I've seen some teams kind of create these at the beginning and then they set it and forget it. And since this is a newer concept, people don't kind of put it in with the rest of their DevOps processes. And one thing I'll say about these is that as the tech changes, like it all is right now, it's so important to sit down and code review them the same way that you review any code. A couple of the teams that I work with right now that use them include this within just their regular process. So a developer puts up a PR, maybe that PR introduced a new library. Maybe they decided that Tailwind is outdated and now we're going to switch to Material UI. That means that this should also be updated with that change. And so it's on us to continue to maintain this and let this grow because it's a first-party citizen. I mean, it should live with your code the same way that you respect the rest of your files. And so with that, that's kind of the overall framework. I use AI for, like I said, for most parts of my job and even in parts of my personal life. I think it's a really great tool, and I don't want this talk to have dissuaded you from using it because I think it's important, I think it's good, and I think that as developers that want to stay modern, it's the way that we should be doing a lot of these things. However, when we're learning something new, whether it's in code or in our personal lives or for any part of our work, when you're learning something, always ask for processes, foundations, fundamentals. How do I do this? Not do it for me. And when you're analyzing, ask for data, ask for proof, and validate that proof with other humans. If you're making a hiring decision and you don't feel like you know enough questions to prompt the model well, question if you should be prompting the model and consider asking a human instead. And then when we're augmenting what we do, and I think this is the one that most of us find ourselves in as developers, augment the tactical. The strategic is still human. The design patterns are still human. The overall scalability and the life cycle of the code is still a human thing. And I mean, personally, that's my favorite part about all of this, right? We're in this to be problem solvers. We're in this to make people's lives better with technology. And I don't think that AI has come far enough for us to trust it with that purpose. So when we're writing code, we're doing something that we already know how to do. Trust AI to do the part that's boring, generate the CSS or configure Tailwind or set up my React app, but don't make those decisions for me. So kind of in closing, I love AI, use it every day. I hope that you do too. But next time you're using it, you should ask yourself, am I using AI on purpose or am I just using it to move more quickly? Thank you.